Well, so you're asking the question. You're asking the question that is one of the hard questions in general education, right? So how do you do individualized instruction in a group setting? So how do you do that in neurotypical classrooms? How do you do it in classrooms where kids have developmental challenges? And there's no one answer or no right answer. There are answers that apply more to our setting and might work better, and there are answers that are clearly wrong. It's like a wrong answer in this case would be you take all the children and you throw them in a pit of lava. That's a wrong answer, right? So there are clearly wrong answers, but right answers are not always so easy. So, and I say it this way specifically because one of the things I wanted to talk about today is that there aren't right answers to questions in general in most of life. And one of the things that makes us different than behaviorists is that we don't hurt children by teaching them that there is a dichotomous choice. That you're either right or you're wrong, you get rewarded for right, you get punished for wrong. Or at the very least, you get punished in the way that behaviorists talk about punishment, which is by not giving you a reward and ignoring a behavior, planned ignoring or something like that. So it's pernicious to imagine that there's always a choice, that you can go down a road. Once you've made the choice, you've got to keep going. When you have a disastrous plan, you should abandon it and turn back around and come back to another place. And our methodology, when it's working correctly, does that perfectly. And it is really important to remember that we're not saying to children, there's a right and there's a wrong. So in answer to your question, there's no right and wrong answer to this. There are some clearly wrong answers, but there's maybe various degrees. So let's talk about the various degrees that might apply to this school. When you have children at different functional, emotional, developmental capacities, maybe mix some, you try to group them fairly closely age-wise, fairly closely, certainly closely puberty-wise, if you can, because puberty is a dramatic challenge in our world, in every world, frankly. For those of you who remember puberty, it was a challenge. But in our world, a double challenge, right? Because maybe you get to functional, emotional, developmental capacity 3, but then you're a fully sexual adult. So you haven't yet really signed the social contract, which says, I don't just grab people because it hurts them and frightens them. And so you may be acting out sexually in some ways, you may be publicly masturbating, you may be doing a lot of things. So we try to group people fairly closely maturationally and fairly closely functionally, emotionally, developmentally, but you may have a really wide FEDC range. It's possible. So how do you work with that? Well, you could say, I'm going to run this lesson because there are kids sitting at this table right now who next year are going to have to go to the public system. You could say, okay, well, we have to get them ready for public education. And there will be kids who are going to miss the boat on this, who are not going to have any idea what's going on and aren't ready for it. But we have to do this. That's one thing you may choose to do, and that I'm not saying that's wrong. Maybe sometimes you have to do it, right? Like I have to run a group that maybe is above the head of a third of the people who are here, but we have to, because if we don't, how will they know that they all stand at attention when the national anthem comes on? And how will they know that, this is a science class and this is how you act in science class and you've got to do it? How will they know that? So it's important stuff. So that's one possible answer. You have to ignore certain kids. Then another answer might be that you have to group two kids who, during math, function at this level together. And the three kids who function at this level together, and the two kids who have no chance whatsoever to be doing any math are getting a different thing that's happening, or something that is mathy so that they can feel part of it, but isn't that curriculum. So you really have to differentiate, and so that's a possibility too. And I think that's actually a really good answer for a lot of different situations. During math, you happen to be able to do multiplication and you do too, and this is what we're working on. You are still working at one-to-one correspondence, but we can be doing that. We have enough teaching people in the room to do that, and I think that's what has to happen, right? It may be, as your third alternative answer to this question, that there are some activities in a group classroom where the variety of FEDCs and the variety of unique sensory perspectives and thought perspectives are really useful. And that a kid who's about to go to public school who's functioning at FEDC 6 may really benefit from the perspective of somebody in the classroom who's functioning at FEDC 2. And so in those situations, the homogeneity of the mix is a problem, and the heterogeneity of the mix is actually an asset. And so in those groups, I would put them all together and make sure that the FEDC 6 kid heard the perspective of this unique and brilliant mind who's thinking differently than him or her or they. So that we would call neurodiversity, right? So the answer depends on what you're going for. If today's lesson is about, holy crap, you're about to leave the school? Well, then we better teach you, if you're 5 years old, we better teach you what those little circles are, on the floor are for, because you're supposed to be sitting on those in the kindergarten, right? Or you're about to go to a high school? Well, let me show you what you need to look like in a high school. Maybe that's the point of today's lesson. If the point of today's lesson is listen to other voices and imagine that people have value, then maybe you're going on the neurodiversity topic, right? And then you pull people in and say, wait a second, just because you think of yourself as more cognitively able, you're not allowed to not listen to this person who has maybe even speech production challenges, and you have to support that. Aside from the fact that societally it's appropriate, it's also really good psychologically for the kid at FEDC 6. Because there's a chance, if they have been diagnosed with a developmental challenge, maybe called autistic, when they go to another school, there will be other people who will look at them as weirdos, right? Like, you don't act like me, you don't think like me, even though you are cognitively in a certain place. If you allow them to dismiss the thought of somebody who looks more challenged than them, what you're allowing them to do is internalize society's hatred of them, right? And so they will recognize the hatred and they will not have the confidence to move forward. And so you want to avoid that internalized societal stuff. So it's really, really important. But really the strategy I think you're going to go with most of the time is appropriate groupings around academic abilities, particularly when you're talking about an academic program. And the parents will want that. The parents will say to you, my child came to you doing addition, why aren't you ever doing addition? And you know, your answer can't be because not everybody can do addition. The answer has to be, well, of course they're doing addition, and here we do it, and they're grouped with the people who know how to do it, and you know, that's what I think. In terms of strategies for pulling people together, which was actually your question, I don't have any strategies. I'm strategyless. Because there are no strategies.
Can I say one?
You can say strategies, but it will be contrary to my point, so I'm not going to let you talk. But you're probably right that you can come up with ways to do it. I totally understand. But my point is that I don't come into the place with strategies ever. There are no strategies. Strategies are ways to get from one point to another, but they're not education. Education, as we're defining it today, not as it's generally defined always, is coming in the presence of somebody with open eyes and be prepared for where they are. And then meet them where they are, which sometimes gets called following a child's lead. A terrible, stupid phrase that Stanley or somebody made up because it ends up being interpreted as chase a child around a room. But that's not what it means. It means meet people where they are, which is good strategy always. Do I have things that I generally do that I wouldn't call them strategies, but they're like I do them habitually and sometimes they work? Yeah, I do that stuff. But strategies, I don't know. I think you guys all come with good intent, right? So you're in the classroom, you got to this school, they don't pay you as much as other schools could. You could make more money elsewhere, maybe. So why are you here? You're here because you're do-gooders who come with good intent, right? And your good intent is what you're bringing to each situation. So come with open eyes and good intent, and all of a sudden you're doing really good work with people. Don't be terrified. You can't make bad mistakes. There's no, if you mess up, well, who cares? Remember, there's no right or wrong. If you think there's a right or wrong, aren't you transmitting that to the kids? So there isn't any right or wrong. So come in, try, and fail. And then the next thing fails, the next thing fails. Don't get bitten, don't get hit, don't get punched, don't get scratched, don't get licked. You can avoid it. Right? I mean, I'm just saying the truth, right? And outside of those things, just try it.